They told me love was a fire, meant to warm souls, not burn vows. But I have held both, the rosary and the body, the prayer and the breath that breaks it. I once believed salvation was earned through denial. But when I saw her eyes, I mistook compassion for calling. Now, 25 years later, I kneel in the back of his church, my son's church, listening to him preach about forgiveness. He doesn't know that I am the reason he learned that word. And when he says Amen, I whisper it too, as both sinner and father. I was 34 when the drought came, not just in the fields, in faith too. The villages stopped attending confession because hunger has a way of replacing guilt with necessity. I was stationed in Cauca, a province too forgotten for postcards but too proud to die. My name then was Father Ignacio Reyes, a man of obedience, of silence, of words spoken only to God and the dead. Every morning I would walk the ridge where the mountains curved like the back of a kneeling man. Below, the river had thinned to a silver thread. The church bell rang without echo. And one day, she came. Her name was Lucia. She was carrying a boy, not hers, burned from the waist down, trembling like a broken candle. "Please," she said, "you're the only one with clean water." She was not beautiful the way temptation usually enters a story. Her beauty was exhaustion, raw, useful, unhidden. A face that didn't beg but believed. I cleaned the boy's wounds while she stood behind me, whispering prayers I hadn't heard since seminary. That night, she stayed in the rectory because the storm cut off the road. And as thunder split the night, I felt something stir that was not holy. The next morning, she helped me feed the orphans. Her hands were strong, the kind that turned every act of service into grace. When she smiled at the children, the chapel felt alive again, as if Christ had returned in a woman's laughter. But whispers began. The butcher stopped greeting me. The mayor hinted that I'd grown too compassionate. Compassion. Such a gentle word for sin. Lucia left 3 weeks later, back to her town. I prayed, fasted, punished the flesh. But the prayers no longer returned like they used to. They fell flat, as if heaven had stopped answering. Then came the letter. Short, desperate. "Ignacio, I'm with child." I'm sorry, I remember sitting in the confession booth that night, hearing only my breath. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." But there was no priest left to answer. I went to her. I told her to hide. We moved her to a remote village near the Magdalena River, a place with no record, no questions. I baptized the child under another name, Samuel. Lucia didn't ask for marriage. She didn't ask for love. She only asked that I stay until the boy learned to speak, and I stayed for 3 years. Every sunrise, I carried him to the river and dipped his tiny feet in the water. He'd laugh, and I would feel my faith come back, not through prayer, but through fatherhood. When Lucia died of fever, I buried her beneath a mango tree. The boy was 5. He asked me why she didn't wake. I said, "Because even angels rest." That was the day I removed my collar. not because I stopped believing in God, but because I believed He'd already forgiven me for what I chose to love. When I left the village, I left Samuel with an old nun I trusted. I told her he was an orphan. She believed me. The child grew, studied, and followed the same path I once walked. To seminary, to the pulpit, to the altar. I watched from afar, never writing, never speaking. Every sermon he gave I attended in silence, like a ghost who still wanted to pray. Sometimes I wonder, did I save his soul, or condemn it to inherit my sin? That question is the only prayer I still say. It began as forgiveness, not desire. Or so I told myself. After I left the church, I found refuge in a fishing village near Barranquilla. I worked as a teacher, arithmetic by day, prayers by night. But no one there called me Father. I was simply Señor Reyes, the quiet man who read scripture aloud when storms drowned the power lines. I missed the weight of the cassock, that soft prison of devotion. Without it, I felt both lighter and exposed, like a man stripped of his title and his chains. Sometimes at night, I'd walk along the coast, the salt wind cutting through my old faith. In the distance, I imagined Lucia's voice, the way she used to hum hymns while washing clothes by the river. And I'd feel her absence burn like confession withheld. Years passed. Samuel's letters, the few the nun dared to send, spoke of his brilliance, his kindness. He'd been accepted into a theological institute in Bogotá, a priest in the making. The irony struck deep. The son born of sin was walking the same sacred path as his father. I should have rejoiced. Instead, I feared him. Because if he ever found me, I would have to tell him the truth. Then came the day temptation wore a familiar face, not of flesh this time, but of memory. A local woman, Isabel, joined the small parish choir I helped with. Widowed, mid-30s, soft-spoken, her laugh was the sound of reprieve. We sang hymns side by side, her voice trembling with the same reverence that once made me believe. One evening, after rehearsal, the lights went out. She stayed behind to lock the doors. We stood in the dark, breathing the same air, listening to the echo of our own restraint. Her hand brushed mine. I didn't move it away. It wasn't passion, not yet. It was recognition. Two broken souls kneeling before the same silence. Temptation is not always loud. Sometimes it enters as comfort, disguised as mercy. Isabel began visiting often. She'd bring soup for the children, candles for the chapel, questions for me. Questions I had no right to answer. What do you think forgiveness really means, Señor Reyes? I'd smile faintly. It means remembering without wanting to forget. We grew close in that unspoken way that pretends to be friendship, but every kindness carried the weight of what I once vowed to resist. And then, one night after confession practice, she kissed me. I didn't stop her. The world tilted, and in that instant, all my sermons about restraint vanished. The sea roared outside, as if baptizing our sin in salt. Afterward, I walked the shore alone, whispering old psalms, trying to wash her from my breath. But the taste of her lingered, not as sin, but as something frighteningly sacred. Days turned into months. We loved quietly, tenderly, with the caution of those who know God is still watching. Isabel never asked about my past. She thought I was a widower. In her eyes, my silence was sorrow, not guilt. For a while, I felt human again. And yet, deep down, I knew this peace was borrowed, a calm before revelation. One morning, a letter arrived, from Samuel. He'd been ordained. He was now Father Samuel Reyes, preaching in Medellín. He wrote with joy, humility, and an unknowable echo of myself. Father Ignacio, I have learned that faith is not the absence of doubt, but the courage to love despite it. If you are the same priest who once baptized me as a child, I wish to meet you. Your words have stayed with me my entire life. He signed, in His grace, your Son in Christ. The irony cut deeper than any punishment. He was searching for the man who gave him faith, not knowing he was searching for his own blood. I folded the letter and placed it inside my Bible. For days I couldn't sleep. Each prayer turned into a memory of his first cry, the way his fingers once curled around mine. Isabel noticed my distance. "You're fading from me," she said. I lied. It's just work. But lies have a pulse, and mine beat faster each night. Eventually, I went to Medellín. I told Isabel it was to visit an old friend. In truth, it was to stand at the back of a church where my past now wore vestments. When I saw him, standing behind the altar, the sunlight breaking across his face, I almost called out his name. He spoke with the same rhythm I once used, the same tenderness in pauses, the same habit of glancing upward before quoting scripture. He was me, uncorrupted. A mirror of what I could have been, had I not followed the heart's dangerous gospel. After Mass, I waited outside. He walked past, greeted the parishioners, smiled at strangers. And for a moment, his eyes caught mine. He hesitated, as if he knew something, then turned away politely. "Were you a priest once?" he asked, noticing the crucifix on my wrist. "Yes," I said quietly. "A long time ago." He smiled. "Then you must know. It never really leaves you." That night, I stayed in a cheap inn near the cathedral. I lay awake, listening to bells echo through the fog, wondering if this was punishment or mercy, to see one's own redemption embodied in another man's innocence. I kept attending his masses, always in shadow. Each sermon felt like a dialogue between us, him speaking of grace, me listening as if for a verdict. Once, during a homily, he said, "We inherit our parents' wounds, even when we don't know their names. But God turns even those scars into bridges." I left before the benediction, trembling, because I knew he was speaking of me, somehow, without knowing me at all. When I returned to the village, Isabel was gone. She'd left a note. "You love ghosts more than the living." She was right. My life had become a rosary of regrets. Each bead a face I once touched, each prayer a name I couldn't say aloud. In losing her, I felt the full weight of what the church once warned me. Sin does not destroy love. It teaches you how fragile it is. That was the moment I understood temptation's true shape. Not the woman, not the act, but the desire to believe that love could rewrite what faith had forbidden. And still, I went on loving in silence, because even silence can sound like prayer, if you whisper it long enough. The first indulgence of a priest is not the body. It is the lie that the body does not matter. I used to think I could control my sin by naming it, by calling my desires loneliness, my lies mercy, and my guilt devotion. But sin, when dressed in holy language, only learns to kneel. I stayed in Medellín, too close to Samuel, too far from forgiveness. Each day I found excuses to linger near his parish. He preached at dawn, and I would sit among widows and vagrants, pretending to be one of them, a tired old man chasing scraps of faith. He spoke like the first rain after drought. Love, he said, is not perfection, it is persistence. And I believed him. The words that should have been mine now sounded purer in his mouth. After service, I followed him to the orphanage he ran behind the church. He was gentle with the children, the same tenderness I remembered in my own hands. Watching him was like staring at a reflection that refused to age. Then one afternoon, a boy fell from the orphanage stairs, breaking his leg. Samuel carried him to the infirmary, calling for help. I stepped forward instinctively, revealing myself. He recognized me from the pews. "You again," he said. "You're always here." "Are you family to someone?" The word family froze in the air. "No," I replied, "just someone who once knew grace." He smiled, the kind that forgives before it questions. "Then stay. We can always use another set of hands." And so I stayed. I swept floors, cleaned bandages, mended books. Each day I became part of his world while hiding that I was the one who built it. Temptation, I discovered, was no longer lust or love. It was proximity. To live so near the truth and never confess it. To hear him call me Don Ignacio, while I longed to hear Father. One night we were repairing a leaking roof together. The rain came heavy, filling the gutters, drumming the same rhythm I once heard in the confessional booth. He looked at me and said, "You speak like a man who's lived 2 lives." I laughed softly. Maybe I have. One for God, one for what he forgot to save. He didn't ask more, but his eyes lingered, curious, searching, kind. And kindness is a dangerous indulgence. The next week, he invited me to share confession. It was part of a training for young seminarians to practice listening, not judging. He sat in the opposite booth, his voice calm and steady. "Speak, my brother." And I did, not fully, but enough to tremble. I once broke my vows. I fathered a child. I believed I was saving a life. Maybe I was saving myself. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Did you love her?" "Yes." "And the child?" "More than my own salvation." His breath caught. "Then perhaps you understand God better than most priests." That was the moment indulgence became blindness. I should have confessed everything. But I didn't. I wanted his peace, not his pity. I wanted to protect him. From me. Weeks turned into months. Samuel became my only friend. We shared meals, laughter, sermons. He even took my advice on parish repairs and scriptures, unaware he was quoting his own father's words back to him. Every time he smiled, something inside me both healed and broke. I began to believe I could live like this forever, half sinner, half father, half forgiven. But God does not tolerate fractions. One evening, a journalist came to interview Father Samuel. An article about the new face of Colombian faith. I was sweeping the corridor when she arrived. Her eyes caught me. "Señor Reyes?" "Ignacio Reyes?" My hands froze. She recognized me. Years ago, she had written about my disappearance. The priest who vanished after rumors of a forbidden child. She smiled thinly. So you are alive? And you're working here, under his parish? My voice cracked. Please, don't. But she was already writing. Samuel came out, confused. Do you know each other? The journalist's pen stopped. She looked between us, her tone now heavy with implication. Let's just say the past never stays buried. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound was a knock on the door. Every prayer was a heartbeat out of rhythm. The article published 3 days later. Disgraced priest found living under alias, now assisting parish of his rumored son. Samuel read it during morning mass. He didn't finish the sermon. He simply walked off the altar and locked himself in his office. I stood outside for hours, my old rosary twisting in my hand. When he finally opened the door, his face was pale, his eyes hollow. Is it true? He asked. Yes. You are my father? I am your sin. He trembled. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to be free of my shadow. He stared at me, tears pooling like unspoken prayers. I preached forgiveness every day, he said. But you never gave me the chance to practice it. He left the parish for a month. The congregation whispered, the children cried. And I, the cause of it all, stayed to sweep the empty pews. A priest turned janitor. A father turned ghost. When he returned, he did not look at me. He went straight to the altar, preaching not of love or grace, but of truth. Lies, even told in kindness, are still chains, he said. And those who hide them only crucify the people they claim to protect. Every word was a blade, every silence a wound. After Mass, he walked past me, didn't speak, didn't stop, only brushed his fingers against the pew where I sat, the way a son might touch the coffin of a father he's not ready to bury. That was the last indulgence, believing I could hide sin beneath service. I had mistaken love for redemption, and now both were gone. The body had never been the sin. The lie was. There are silences that echo longer than thunder. When the truth came out, mine filled the whole valley. I became the scandal priests warn each other about, the whisper between sermons, the cautionary name uttered in seminaries. Every letter I'd ever written, every parish I'd ever served, was now evidence, not of crime, but of contradiction. The church didn't excommunicate me. It did something worse. It forgot me. Samuel's parish emptied for weeks. Faith is fickle when the shepherd's father is a sinner. Rumors turned into sermons. Morality became gossip with incense. And I, the ghost who started it, was left to wander between headlines and guilt. When I tried to leave the city, a woman selling rosaries on the street recognized me. Padre Ignacio? She whispered, half awe, half pity. I wanted to deny it, but the word padre made me tremble. It had been years since anyone called me that without irony. Yes, I said softly. I used to be. She pressed a wooden cross into my hand. For your son, she said. He speaks of forgiveness like he's seen it die and come back. I thanked her and walked on, the cross burning my palm. Days blurred. I lived in a rented room above a bakery, the air thick with sugar and shame. I could hear the church bells each morning, Samuel's bells, and each toll felt like a reminder of what I'd destroyed. I wrote him letters I never sent, confessions, apologies, fragments of memories. You once laughed in your sleep as a child. You dreamed of angels, but all I could see was your mother's eyes. Forgive me for baptizing you under a lie. Forgive me for thinking love could hide beneath God's name. I tore them all up, because forgiveness, I had learned, is not something you can request twice. Weeks later, I heard Samuel had returned to the pulpit. The journalist's story had faded into the noise of other scandals: politicians, generals, bankers. Sin ages fast in this world. Only guilt stays young. I attended one of his masses again, disguised beneath a hat. He didn't mention me. He didn't need to. We all carry a cross, he said, but some of us carve it ourselves. He looked up briefly, and for a second I thought he saw me. But maybe he just looked through me, the way one looks through the ghost of a memory. That night, I collapsed outside the cathedral. The cold hit my bones, and the bells kept ringing, distant and merciless. I woke in a hospital. A nurse said I had pneumonia. When she asked for my next of kin, I said, "He's in the next life already." She nodded, thinking I meant death. I meant something harder. As I lay there, drifting between sleep and confession, I dreamed of Lucia. She stood by the river, holding the child again. She smiled. "Did you raise him well?" she asked. "I tried," I said. "Then stop punishing yourself for loving him wrong." When I woke, tears had dried into salt on my face. I asked the nurse for a Bible. She handed me one without a cover, old, used, scribbled in. Inside the first page was a signature: Samuel Reyes. It was his old copy, donated to the hospital years ago. The irony that I would die reading my son's scripture felt almost like grace. After discharge, I returned to the village where Lucia was buried. The mango tree had grown wide, heavy with fruit. I sat beneath it for hours, reading passages aloud. To her, to God, to the silence that had replaced both. One day, Samuel came. I don't know how he found me. Maybe the same God I defied led him here. He stood quietly behind me until I turned. We didn't speak at first. He looked thinner, older, not in years, but in forgiveness. Finally, he said, "You could have told me the truth sooner. I wanted to spare you." He shook his head. "You spared yourself." He sat beside me, staring at the same earth that held his mother. "I hated you," he said, "and then I tried to hate myself for hating you. I deserve that." "No," he whispered. "You deserve peace. You just never asked for it." I wanted to hold him, but we were both too proud. The priest and the penitent, sitting like strangers on sacred ground. He reached into his pocket and took out a small wooden cross, the same one the woman had given me. He must have found it when I dropped it at the church. He placed it between us. "Keep it," he said, "or bury it. Either way, stop carrying it in your chest." I nodded, unable to speak. He left soon after, walking back toward the road, his cassock brushing the dust that used to be my faith. That night, I finally prayed again, not to be forgiven, but to be forgotten. Because sometimes, the only way to find peace is to stop asking heaven to remember you. The next morning, I buried the cross under Lucia's tree. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel the urge to justify anything. Not the sin, not the love, not the silence. Only the wind answered, carrying the smell of mango and rain. It felt like her breath, and maybe, faintly, like God's. That was my collapse, not of faith, but of resistance. The moment I stopped fighting what I had become. A sinner who loved too deeply to let go, and a father too afraid to be called by name. Confession used to be a ritual for others. Now it is the only thing keeping me alive. In this village, there is a small chapel, half ruined, half remembered. The roof leaks when it rains. The saints have lost their faces to smoke. No one comes anymore, except me. Each morning, I unlock its gate, sweep the dust, light a single candle. Not to serve, not to pray. Just to let God know I haven't left. The locals call me El Viejo del Silencio, the old man of silence. They don't know I was once the voice behind the altar. They think I'm just another hermit who talks to ghosts. They're not wrong. One afternoon, a stranger arrived, a pilgrim traveling through the mountains. He asked if the chapel still offered confession. I almost said no, but his eyes, weary, restless, reminded me of the man I used to be, so I nodded. He knelt before me, and I sat where a priest would sit. The irony stung. He began to speak. I've failed my family. I've betrayed my vows. I keep asking for forgiveness, but all I hear is silence. I said quietly, sometimes silence is forgiveness. He wept, and in his trembling I heard every sin I had ever named, every face I had buried beneath prayer. When he left, he kissed my hand. He thought I was still a priest. I didn't correct him. Maybe in that moment, I was again. That night, I sat beneath Lucia's tree with my Bible open to the story of Peter, the man who denied Christ 3 times and was still chosen to build his church. I realized something. God never demands perfection. He asks only for truth. And I had spent half my life avoiding it. So I began to write, not letters this time, not to Samuel, not to Rome, but to the God I once served with fear, and the woman I loved with guilt. Lucia, I know now that love was not my downfall. Fear was. Fear of losing faith, of losing the image of holiness I built like a wall between us. And you, Lord, you never abandoned me. I abandoned you when I decided your mercy was too small to hold my sin. I wrote until dawn, until the candle melted into itself. Weeks passed. Samuel came again, this time without his collar. He said he was on retreat, a sabbatical. I needed to remember why I believed in the first place, he said. He looked around the chapel. You built this? Yes, I said, but it was never finished. Neither are we, he answered. We sat in the pews, our silence comfortable this time. He told me stories of his parish, of the orphans, of how people still came to him despite everything. They don't care about the scandal anymore, he said. They care about the sermons that sound human. Then he asked, do you still pray? Only when I forget not to. He smiled. That's still prayer. Before leaving, he handed me an envelope. Inside was a photograph. Him, standing with a group of children, sunlight in their faces. On the back, he'd written, "You taught me what love costs. I teach them what it's worth." I wanted to cry, but the tears never came. Perhaps I had wept too much already. Perhaps I was finally empty enough to be forgiven. That evening, I entered the confessional booth one last time. Not as priest, not as penitent, but as both. I whispered into the dark, "Forgive me, Father, for I have lived." No answer came, only wind. But in that wind, I felt warmth, as if God exhaled through the cracks of the old wood, telling me I'd said enough. The next morning, I burned the letters I'd written. Ash scattered across the altar, drifting upward like small gray prayers. I didn't need them to be read. The act itself was absolution. When Samuel visited again, he found me sweeping, humming an old hymn. He said, "You seem lighter." I said, "Maybe I finally told the truth to someone who was listening." He frowned. "Who? God? Or your mother? Maybe both." He laughed, and for the first time in years, I did too. The sound startled us. Raw, clumsy, human. Before he left, he knelt beside me. "I forgive you," he said. I placed my hand on his head. "No," I whispered. "We forgive each other." It was not dramatic. No thunder, no light. Just two voices in an empty chapel, rediscovering what silence means. That was my confession. Not the words, but the acceptance. That the truth does not erase sin. It sanctifies it. Because in the cracks of imperfection, that's where grace slips in. The final season of my life came quietly. No miracles, no revelations. Only the slow softening of a man who had spent too long at war with his own reflection. The mango tree outside the chapel dropped fruit faster than I could gather it. Children from the village came to help, laughing, barefoot, loud. They didn't know who I was, and I didn't tell them. To them, I was the old man who told stories about rain, who gave out slices of fruit and whispered blessings without names attached. It was enough. Every evening the sun slid over the mountains like an ember going out. I would sit by the chapel door, tracing the cracks in my old rosary. The wood had splintered, the beads uneven, like time itself had grown tired of counting my prayers. Sometimes Samuel visited. Sometimes he didn't. It didn't matter anymore. Love had become something quieter than presence. When he did come, he brought me wine. We'd sit beneath Lucia's tree, sharing silence like communion. He'd read his new sermons aloud, less about sin, more about mercy. His words had changed. So had mine. Once he asked, "Do you still believe in redemption?" I smiled. Only when I stopped trying to deserve it. He nodded, writing it down, maybe for some future homily. I didn't mind. I had spent too many years hiding my truth. If he wanted to preach it, let him. Let someone turn my ruin into something useful. Months passed. The chapel roof finally caved in during the rainy season. I didn't rebuild it. I left it open to the sky, the way my faith had finally learned to breathe. People from nearby villages began to come on Sundays, bringing candles, bread, and songs. Not for Mass, not for doctrine, just to remember that silence could still be holy. I never stood before them. I sat among them. Sometimes the children would call me Padre, and I would answer softly, "Not anymore, little one, but thank you." The night before my death, the rain came heavy again. Samuel arrived unexpectedly, drenched, breathless. "I was preaching in Cartagena," he said, "but something told me to come." He found me sitting where I always sat, at the altar, candle burning low. "I'm glad you did," I said. We talked for hours, not about sin or faith, but about ordinary things: the river's rise, the mango harvest, the way the air smelled before dawn. Then he asked, "Do you fear dying?" I thought for a long time. "No," I said. "I fear being remembered without forgiveness." He placed his hand on mine. "Then I'll remember you with mercy." We didn't speak again. The candle burned down. The storm eased into silence. I died before sunrise. He found me still sitting upright, the rosary coiled between my fingers. They buried me beside Lucia, under the same mango tree where it all began. No choir, no vestments, just villagers humming an old hymn about rivers returning to the sea. Samuel gave the eulogy. He didn't say my name. He didn't need to. He simply said, "There are sins that build walls, and there are sins that teach us how to tear them down." The man we bury today built no walls. He only tried to love past them. Years later, they say the chapel became a place of pilgrimage, not for miracles, but for silence. People came to sit where I once confessed to no one and everyone. They said the wind there carried peace. Maybe it was just the sound of mango leaves brushing against heaven. If this story ever reaches ears that still believe faith must be flawless, tell them about me. Tell them that love, even when it breaks the rules, can still build the altar. Tell them that a priest once sinned to become a father, and in doing so, finally learned what grace feels like when spoken without words. Because redemption isn't something we find at the end. It's the quiet breath that never left us, waiting, patient, beneath the noise of our guilt.